Welcome to Life, Laughter, Divorce, episode 68. I'm your host, Leanne Linsky.
And I'm the boyfriend.
Welcome back to another wonderful week of divorce.
They keep coming and I'm still on the train.
Woo. Woo. I just wooed. What is happening?
I have no idea.
Oh, you guys, this has been a crazy couple of weeks here at Life, Laughter, Divorce. While you're tuning in, make sure you rate, review, and subscribe because we really want to hear from you. Or just check in at the website at lifelaughterdivorce.com.
And we all know people that have been going through crazy relationship breakups and things and whatever else. Tell your friends to listen.
Yeah, because they're not going to want to miss these recent episodes. Last week was with Mark and Maddie, and this episode is with Chris and Misty. This is actually a two-parter. Each are a standalone episode in their own right, but we're clumping them together.
I was blown away because normally people have their own story together kind of thing, and it's like something funny happens to one of them or to both of them together. These guys have two separate, really interesting stories. They sort of come together, but they're, it was like writers for TV shows can't make this stuff up.
I see a TV show coming out with this one.
I could, yeah.
Right? Yeah. So, these were fascinating to hear what had happened. It was a lot of like, really? Are you kidding me?
But we also have to warn our listeners. You are
witnessing.
No, you are quite, you know these people really well.
Yes.
So.
Okay. So these are really good friends of mine from back in my Vegas days. And Chris and I used to perform together. And this is before he and Misty were married. And Glenn from one of our previous episodes back in the 40s of this season.
Released in December, the Thanksgiving episode, if you remember the Tostitos pizza rolls.
Right, with the fingers, nipples, and mousetraps.
Yep.
So Glenn joins us also. We had all gotten together one evening and recorded these couple of episodes. And Chris, his story, we're starting out with his today, tomorrow, this week in this episode. We're starting with Chris's story because it's more about how his whole entire family has been affected by divorce and
relationships and the interesting relationships you can have amongst family. I'll just leave it at that.
As a result of divorce or not. So there's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on, but
here.
it's his journey and how he got to a point where he was ready to take Misty into his life. And then next week,
we're going to hear from Misty and her own journey through divorce and how she ended up
with Chris. So it's a really interesting two stories that come together. And like I said, this is a TV movie kind of thing. So it is.
And there was 5 of us in the room. So we had lots of different questions and different moments.
You're probably going to have some what moments too when you listen to this. Just follow along.
And the one thing that we had that you won't have is a fantastic dinner among friends. So hopefully you can grab your plate and your fork and your knife and a glass of something cool and refreshing so that you can join us for this dinner episode. So I'd like you to meet my friends Chris and Misty and Glenn without further ado. Welcome to Life, Laughter, Divorce.
Take 7.
We're with Chris, Misty, the boyfriend, and Glenn. Hello, everybody out there.
Hi, boyfriend.
Glenn is back from way back in one of our episodes in the 40s.
That's the Thanksgiving episode.
Yeah,
what about chlamydia?
What about stuffing the turkey?
We're back in Vegas for a visit, and we want to start at the beginning, Chris. Where does the beginning start with you for your story about divorce?
My story begins. So I have never been divorced. Not yet. Boom, boom.
Shut up.
No, I'm the child of divorce. I would say that a lot of how I became who I am today is very influenced by by my parents' marriage. And I would say a lot of the problems that I had growing up and up until my adult life can be traced back to my parents' marriage and their parents' marriage, because it gets kind of Jerry Springer-esque in this whole saga.
Do we have to do DNA?
We can.
We've already done DNA.
yeah.
They need to do DNA. But
They
they're
need to
dead.
do DNA.
You
It
do
starts with
D&D.
it starts with my parents met because my mother's father and my father's mother were having an affair. Bum bum bum.
Dun, dun, dun.
So yeah, my mother grew up in Chicago, and my mother is Middle Eastern. They're Assyrians, not Syrians, but like Eastern Catholic type people.
Is that why your ass holding?
Assyrian, yes. My other grandmother used to joke that I'm half-ass Syrian. That's her little ha 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 ha. Shut up, white lady. So my mother's family moved to California when she was in high school, and she was like, princess growing up. The firstborn couldn't go, her father kind of treated her like a princess. And my grandfather, her father, was one of those guys who was like larger than life, very big presence. He was everybody loved him. And he kind of brought her up in this fairy tale world of like kind of a Disney world. She was very sheltered with her outlook on stuff. So somewhere around, 14 or 15, they moved to California, and my grandfather just picks up and leaves and goes to San Francisco to work. He didn't leave them necessarily, but it was like, Dad's got to go find a job. He was never home. So part of that was his beginning of his long womanizing, seducing women, kind of starting his little franchises. But he wasn't just your kind of guy who would seduce a woman just for sex or whatever. He was this is where I think that he had some very narcissistic tendencies. I don't know if he's dead now.
Is your grandfather?
Grandfather, yeah.
Okay.
His name was McDonald.
He had a farm.
He had a franchise.
He was also
Yeah.
dyslexic because E-I-E-I-O. I don't know what the
OEOEI.
F-A-R-M-E-I. So eventually they moved to Sacramento, and my grandfather, my mother's father, goes and works at this country club as, I don't know, head manager or something like that. And who's working there as a secretary but my dad's mother? And they start hooking up. Now we got that family dynamic.
Wait, who's hooking up?
My mother's father, who's the Middle Eastern.
So your grandfather?
Yeah.
Your grandfather?
And my father's mother.
Your mother's father?
Your paternal grandmother and your maternal grandfather.
Correct.
No.
Okay.
Yes.
My
yes,
maternal-
no. That is correct. I'm sorry.
Maternal grandfather, paternal
grandfather.
grandmother. My parents had not met at this point. They're in high school. They don't know each other. These two
How weird.
work together.
Their parents, though, are hooking up.
Their
Yeah.
parents were hooking up before their kids hooked up.
Right.
Ooh.
So,
Oh,
the
good
other
God.
part of this is that on my dad's side, and
Are
this
you
is
not your own brother?
no.
Right? Like, meh, meh, meh.
On my dad's side, you've got a woman who was unhappily married, divorced to my actual grandfather. This woman was very neurotic, very insecure, very kind of batshit mashugana. And my mother to this day says that my grandmother was probably a little what's that movie?
Cypher.
Fatal Attraction.
Oh, rabbit
So-
boiler.
So my grandfather, mom's
I
dad,
love boiled rabbit.
Mm.
Hassan Pfeffer.
Awesome Fefa.
When he kind of seduced her, she seduced back because they were both nuts.
Of course she did.
This woman's a little histrionic, and my grandfather was tendencies towards narcissism and was looking for his next little catch of the day.
Right.
While his family was kind of living in, at first they were living in Modesto, which is about 2 hours south of Sacramento. And they eventually ended up moving to Sacramento. Now, at some point, my grandmother, my future grandmother, gets pregnant with my grandfather's kid.
What? You haven't told me this.
Yeah.
What?
Oh, yeah.
Oh my god!
But it's
this
his
is
maternal
like new
grandmother.
information.
And maternal
Maternal,
Yeah.
maternal
Wait a minute.
grandfather,
I'm in
maternal.
therapy.
Yeah, no. So this is
So
this
most
is
of
the
this family.
this is the 60s. So this is before you could actually get a legal abortion. So she went out, and what you did back
Is that
then,
what you were?
no, she went out and got a air quotes hysterectomy.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So she went to she went to
After
a
she was
doctor.
pregnant.
Yeah. Very quickly. She was old enough, and whatever happened, she went to a doctor and all that stuff. She had a hysterectomy, and everybody people on my dad's side of the family knew what was going on. I'm pretty sure my father knew.
That's hardcore abortion.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, it was early on. So that's the start of this. So then my mom and my grandfather, my mother and them, they all moved to Sacramento, and she goes into high school. And now she's, because my grandmother's a little fatal attraction and my grandfather is a little narcissistic, they start kind of angling because they like each other, but they're not going to leave their spouses. And they end up so that my mom and my dad are at the same high school.
Which one had the hysterectomy?
The woman.
I'm going to say the woman in this.
His grandfather.
Yes, but not your mother.
Not my mother.
Not
grandmother.
Your grandmother.
His grandmother.
My maternal.
Your father's mother.
So
His father's mother had a hysterectomy. Yes.
So his grandfather and his grandmother.
Oh, no, I just want the audience to make sure they know what they're
This is really confusing.
Yes,
Can we
it
give
is.
them names?
Not really.
Fake names.
Bob and
Bob and
It was
Sally.
your mom's
Sally.
But-
dad and
but
your
that
dad's
doesn't-
mom?
That's what's important is that it's my mother's father and my father's mother. Were cheating on their spouses
with each other.
with each other.
So their in-laws were.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's not like they were in
But
love.
They weren't
There were no
in-laws at the
in-laws
time.
yet.
No, no, no.
Oh, no, this
This
before
is
anybody
His
was
parents were
born.
actually not in
No,
high school
this
yet.
is before my parents really even met each other. They met each other after the fact. So
The only reason his parents met each other is because his grandparents were fucking.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Their parents were messing around.
yeah.
Oh, wow.
So then they kind of just discreetly kind of live in the same
Explains a
area
lot.
so that my grandfather's like, your son should meet my daughter. And your daughter should meet my son. And then my father went to work at the same country club, just, as like a teenager, as a busboy, and met my grandfather. Oh, and larger than life. Everybody loved him. I think he even sent my dad to a brothel when he was 18 to which is like, So that's how this all starts.
There were brothels in California.
Reno, fuckface.
Okay.
So, anywho,
They traveled a few hours.
but the other part of this is that my dad's actual dad was never around. So all of a sudden, my mom's father kind of was this surrogate father to my dad, and he really liked him. And my grandfather, the Assyrian grandfather.
Okay, can we give names? Because I am getting confused.
It's not just me.
Right? No, it's getting confusing.
Why?
So,
When I say grandfather, there's only one grandfather we're
but
talking
that
about.
because then I'm trying to make connections. And if you just give them a name.
Grandfather.
No, not grandfather, just like
Grandfather
Pete.
Assyrian.
Pete and Sally.
Okay, we're gonna call her Maude because that'll be easier for me to remember.
Because that's your real name.
No, well, the grandmother is.
Okay.
She's old.
So,
Yeah, and I'm
Maude.
counting on the fact that she doesn't know what a podcast is.
Okay, because her name
She's
is
not gonna
Maude.
listen to this.
She does, but she's not gonna find this.
Okay, so Maude and
Maude. She, I'm sure she does.
In
And she's got
MySpace.
acute angina, which that grosses me out.
Does she have a MySpace account too?
yes,
And we'll
that
call.
goes with
Because I have an IJ.
MySpace and acute angina.
My China account.
So we'll call your grandmother Maude.
Yeah.
And
your
we'll call your grandfather
Pete.
Pete.
We can't call him Pete because that was his brother's name.
Okay, so
That's just too close to home.
Claude.
So,
Why don't we call
Claude and
him
Maude.
Claude.
Claude?
And Maude.
Claude and fine. Claude
okay,
and
Claude
Maude.
and Maude.
And then your mom
So-
and your
so-
dad.
So
So
are-
Claude
Claude-
and Maude.
Yeah. So Claude is balls deep in Maude.
Okay, but they're both married.
They're both
and they're
married.
having an affair with
Having
each
an
other.
affair,
Wait.
yeah.
Okay.
Did they have any offspring that became your parent?
Yes.
How
no,
did you
no,
know?
not together.
Claude
Not
and-
together. Not
No,
together.
not
No.
together,
No.
but separately.
Okay, Claude and Maude did not have any offspring that became one of your parents.
No.
No.
Okay,
Or
good.
they just had Claude and Maude were each married. So Claude was married to another woman.
Claude
And-
birthed my mother with his wife, my grandmother, and Maude birthed my father
Right.
with my.
Did Claude and Maude have any kids?
No,
No,
they had,
except for the one that was
they had a hysterectomy.
a
No,
hysterectomy.
right. So they were just having affairs, but they each had kids from their own existing
Okay.
marriages.
Claude and Maude did not have a kid named Zod.
Together.
No,
No.
Correct.
not together.
They
No,
just
they did have a kid
Who tried to
named
take over
Neil.
Okay.
Neil came before Zod. Neil before Zod.
That's a Superman.
But that's a non-starter. You're welcome.
Superman pun. All right.
Superman 2, bitches.
1978 never looked so good.
Okay.
Okay. All right. If you're not into Superman, just fast forward for this part. Okay. So Claude and Maude were each married to another person.
Yes.
They were having, and they also, with these other people that they were married to, had children.
Yes.
Claude and Maude married, and they had
No, Claude and Maude never married.
They never married. They had an
other.
affair. So Claude and Maude were both married to other people, had children from other people, and were having an affair.
Yes.
Okay. So turns out that Claude says, "Hey, your son or
We'll have
daughter."
a diagram on the podcast.
They
Yes,
Claude said-
needs
they get to a
meet-
point in this relation in this whole thing where they realize it's kind of gone too far. They shouldn't have a relationship. They're neither of them are going to split with their spouses. I think my Maude was married to my step grandfather who found out about all this and went
Claude?
ballistic.
No.
Not Claude.
We'll call him John because that was actually his name. My grandpa John, who was a step grandfather, he
Good
was
God.
very
Step grandfather?
Yeah.
Why must you confuse things?
I'm confused.
well. No, it makes
That's why
sense
this is
because
like a very juicy story.
my actual father, the grandfather Robinson, was never around, which is part of why my dad was a little screwed up. He was raised by his mother, who was a little nuts.
Maude?
She was Maude. Maude was a neurotic
a little bit
whack
of a-
job.
Okay.
She was a little histrionic. I think that's an actual term. And she fell very
We
easily
could ask
for
Misty's ex's mother.
yeah.
Yeah, well, histrionic is actually a very non-feminist term.
Because it's just
very
hysterical.
male.
But it
Because
is it is
makes
actual
women
term.
look out to be crazy.
Yeah.
Right.
But men can be histrionic as well.
But she was definitely fucking crazy.
Yeah.
Okay.
And still is.
So she still is. She's worse. But she fell very easily to the praise of my grandfather, Claude, who had very narcissistic tendencies. He was constantly wanting to impress people, life of the party. He would do whatever, he wasn't a classic narcissist in that sense because he did have empathy and he did have other things that were nice. But at his core, he just constantly needed others to validate him. So we get to my parents meeting in high school, and they kind of met through the fact that these two knew each other.
They were in the histrionic club.
Yeah.
So Claude and Maude's kids met each other.
Claude and Maude had no kids. They had a
Not together.
No, not together.
But
But
their kids
separately
through
with
Their own
actual
children.
families.
Claude's marriage with she who should not be named.
They had kids, and then Maude,
Maude.
whoever she was married to, they
John.
had kids.
Right. And
And-
basically they were trying to
Push them together.
their relationship
Were they-
because they
Oh.
couldn't have one.
Were really? Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because
So
it
they
was,
set their kids up.
but it was like back in the 60s where they were like, we can't get a divorce, especially my
They were living vicariously through
Yeah.
their own kids' father.
my Middle
Yeah.
Eastern grandfather was
You must be fucked up.
my Middle
He is
East,
fucked up.
Okay.
my Middle Eastern grandfather is Eastern Catholic. So the idea of divorce wasn't even a
Right.
question. And he was too proud. He and my Middle Eastern grandmother, they fucking hated each other. They just argued all the time. They were not happy people. But they were not going to split up. And she was completely oblivious to all this. Now on the dad's side, the white quote unquote family, they all kind of knew what was going on. And they were just like, well, you know, what are you going to do?
Maude's side.
My side. Yeah. They're like, well, it's people and this is the way it is. So they slowly kind of pushed my parents together. And then, of course, my dad all of a sudden is close to getting drafted. This is the late 60s. And then next thing he knows, he's volunteering. He's joining the Air Force because he doesn't want to get drafted. So just before he gets drafted, before he joins the Air Force, they get married. They've never really had a real relationship. They've never really dated anybody in any meaningful way. So it's that you're going off to war and we should get married, and the whole family's behind it. And they have this big wedding. And within probably 4 months of them getting married, she's pregnant with my brother, and he's going to ship off. My brother was born while my dad was in Vietnam. And so right now we've got the start of this really poorly constructed marriage based on these other parents' my grandparents.
Your older brother Vlad.
Claude, yeah.
Claude. Their parents pushed them together for this stupid affair they were having. And now my parents are together. And my father, who is incredibly insecure, being raised by this wacko nut woman, has a wife. And then he immediately at age 18, 19 is shipped off to Vietnam. So he comes back fucked up. Now, he didn't see any horrible action. He didn't see, he was actually in a relatively safe place.
Texas.
No, he was in Phuket. He was at a Air Force base and he was military police. But every single day while he was there were shooting at him. There were helicopters would show up with bodies. So he had rightfully PTSD from the experience. He came back a very different person. My brother, while my dad was away, his feet never touched the ground. He was the first grandchild from both sides of the family born. He was absolutely worshipped. He just, and then, his poor dad is in Vietnam. And this kid was he got a bad start immediately because he was, you know what I'm saying?
He was spoiled.
He was spoiled shitless. So my dad comes back. He's very different. He's drinking more. My mom still has this kind of idea that they living in this kind of perfect, what?
Is this the brother you don't have a relationship
Oh,
with?
yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Oh, the brother stuff.
No. We'll get to that. But
Yeah.
I'm just leading into that because
So my parents really tried hard to make it work. He came back, and my father, he got the GI Bill. He went to Sacramento State College, and he got a degree in psychology. And then he went on to get his master's degree in social work. He busted his ass. He continued. He finished off his time in the Air Force. He would do Air Force. He would go to school. I mean, he was really hauling ass. And I didn't learn this until I was older, but he was banging everything in sight. He was poking the neighbors. He was anybody he could get around. My mom didn't have a clue for a long time. I was born in 1974, 4 years after my brother. And I was a little different because I didn't have to, I was a lot more self-sufficient. The family had calmed down by then. And everything was kind of okay for a while. And then my father finished his degree. And there was a part, like by the time I first had my first memories at age 4, we're living in a small starter house in a small neighborhood. My dad started working. He was working at a medical center, social work type stuff. And my mom was kind of home with us. And then eventually when I went off to kindergarten, she took a job at a Bank of America. But my father continued to cheat and screw around. And he had all these hobbies, and he had all these things that he did to basically avoid us. And it was really strange because I never really thought about it at first, or I didn't think about it until I got older. He spent so much time doing all these other little hobbies and things and was never really around. And for me, that was just normal. And so this leads to my brother growing up. And when he got to about 8, I think my grandfather, the one I said had narcissistic
Claude.
Yeah.
narcissistic tendencies. When us 2 boys were born, those grandparents, Claude and Maude, divided us up and basically picked. He said, I get the first grandkid. She gets the second grandkid. So my brother spent most of his free time with Claude. And then I spent most of my free time with Maude, grandmother. And it had a big impact on who we became. One, only because my brother more recently has said that he was abused by my grandfather. And I won't get into the details of that.
And I don't believe it.
She doesn't believe it, but I'm starting to see this, because there's anybody who knew my grandfather, including myself, would never believe that he would do anything like that. But my brother, based on everything I know about him to this point, experienced some kind of abuse.
When did you find out that Claude and Maude existed as a couple? Because
good question.
Because that at an earlier age would have had a greater impact than something that you would have learned at an older age.
That's a wonderful question because
Good.
Because
Thank you, Glenn.
my brother found out.
You're welcome, Leanne.
My brother found out far earlier than I did. He found out and knew about it in more detail. My impression is, I don't know to what degree, but I mean, my impression is I'm like 8 or 9 years old, and my grandmother would take me over to, Maude would take me to Claude's house to drop me off for whatever reason. And they would kind of give each other an extra long hug and kiss, which was just kind of awkwardly affectionate. Nothing overt, but it was kind of just a little kissing too long.
Half a second too long?
No, 10 seconds too long.
God.
And you're a kid and you're just like, oh, and then grandma would be like, oh, we're really old friends. We really like each other. And you're 8, you're like, okay. And that was that. And then grandma would say, look, don't tell your grandfather. Grandpa John doesn't like Claude. And you're 8, you don't think of that at all. My brother had known about it either sooner or had seen more of it and had been instructed by my grandfather that you don't talk about that. So my brother was eating emotional things and burying them a lot earlier. So you have, over the years, I've learned to really empathize with whatever the hell my brother went through, because he's a kind of a monster, and he still is. But trying to figure out No, he is, but the best thing I can do is kind of figure that out and realize how he got there.
He will always be your brother, regardless.
Yeah.
I don't have to associate with him, but I can understand what's going on.
Right.
And I can also try to tell my mom, look, these things may have happened and whatever. So it was.
By the way, his mom is not speaking with his brother either.
No.
Oh.
And we'll get to that. But
that's probably a healthy thing, though, right?
Yeah.
It is a healthy thing
good.
because he screwed up. I'm sure. Well, Chris will get to it. So.
That's part 3.
Yeah.
So early on, so my memories of I'll get to from age 4 to about 14. That was both my earliest memories and dealing with my brother, and the fact that the home life was turning upside down. My brother started on me when I was about 4 or 5, where it was not just, he didn't do anything abusive physically, but it was the constant talking down to me, belittling me, telling me I was a worthless piece of shit. And this coincided with my father telling my brother the same thing. And I think the dynamic was that my brother started having a relationship with Claude. my father started resenting that Claude was a bigger father figure to his own son than he was. That when my father would do his little narcissistic gaslighting on my mom, because my father started in with his shit, my mom would run to her father. And her father would then defend her, or my mother would either run to Claude or Maude.
This is confusing.
Isn't this crazy?
Okay,
Yes.
you need to start
The
drinking now
names.
and rewind.
Yeah, because the no names thing.
So my mom,
I know I'm drunk right now, and I totally get what's going on. So I can hardly imagine what a sober person listening to this
Yeah.
is thinking right now.
my mother was raised with rose-colored glasses, that everything was a Disney cartoon. And so when my father started to gaslight her, she would usually call Maude, my dad's mother.
Okay, so all right, so Claude and Maude are the grandparents.
Yes.
That's the wrong,
We're
We don't
gonna
have to
rewind.
re-explain
wrong
this.
person to call.
No,
Right?
because my grandmother could totally emasculate her son in a couple, like they would go at it.
So grandmother, grandfather is
Mhm.
Maude and Claude, and then your mother and father is fake names. So
Yeah.
Steve and Eve.
Steve and Eve. So
Mhm.
Steve is Claude's or
Maude.
Maude,
We're going to do this again, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Steve
Steve
is
Leanne
Maude's
doesn't
son.
and Eve is Claude's
Yes.
daughter. And so Eve and Steve are your parents.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's all about Eve.
So in my mother's mind in the 80s, she thought life was perfect. She had a wonderful family, wonderful husband. Everything was great. Eve.
Eve was
Yeah,
like
Eve
excited
was-
because her life was
Steve had
great.
2 kids, Chris and Briss.
Chris and shitface, shithead. And my father was doing what he needed to do as far as bringing home, he had a good income and things were fine. But he was
Steve.
out. Yeah. He was out just banging whatever he could. He kind of came up with this seminar he could do and travel. And of course he went out and
Seminar.
yeah, Seminole, yeah. And he actually took my brother on some trip to, I think, Eugene, Oregon, and my brother witnessed him hitting on a woman.
Mm.
And it was another thing that my brother kind of swallowed and ate, like, emotionally. So my brother kept racking up these things in his life that he felt like it was his duty to bear the burden of these secrets. And then looking back, he very well could have had some kind of abuse thing happening. I'll go ahead and just take his word, like, no.
Mental, like, because yeah.
Clarifying for the listening audience.
No,
Since
let's
we
just
No,
say
that's a
I'm not going to
great-
go into the
that's a good
details.
question.
Steve, Eve's, or Claude's
Right.
physical.
And this is a great question because it's more emotional, like
Yeah.
confusion and abuse.
What I will say,
which is just as bad as physical.
what I will say
Right,
is
yeah,
that what my
yeah.
brother endured was not any kind of physical harm.
but very emotional.
But I'm not going to go into the
confusing.
details. Yeah. So what was I doing? Very likely that something was happening to my brother. He also was displaying things like screwing around with the neighbors, doing sexual stuff, neighbors' kids at age
His
7 or
brother.
8. My
His
brother.
not
Yeah.
his grandpa.
And so I have a really good memory going back to like age 3 and 4. So I remember these things, like hearing my brother talk about stuff, and at that being in an age where I remembered it, but at the time was like, I don't know what that is. And then as I got older going, wait a second.
Right.
And he had, so certain things that he had that were kind of indicative of a sociopath. And these are things I didn't put together until I was in my 30s. But just thinking back to,
But Claude was a narcissist.
yeah.
Okay.
And my father had some narcissistic tendencies, as did my mother had histrionic tendencies. She was very clingy. She was very, anyway. But my brother abused animals. He was very emotionally and psychologically abusive to me. He basically daily told me, almost daily, that I was fat, ugly, stupid, worthless. I didn't matter. And most parents, most kids are like, oh, you're adopted, and your older brother says things. He was telling me daily, nobody likes me. Nobody wanted me around. I was talentless, worthless, stupid. I was showing signs of sense of humor. My whole family is very funny, by the way. But I was also probably the only introvert out of a sea of extroverts in this family. So I didn't speak up much. And then like we had a piano in our house. Like a lot of people grow up with a piano. And I remember sitting down at a young age and figuring out the circle of fifths, just with a couple fingers and this little chord change thing, which is pretty advanced when you're 6 or 7. And my brother shoves me off the piano and he's like, you suck. And he played the one song that my grandfather knew. Claude. No, it was this boogie woogie thing. But he was one of those things he could pull out at a party and impress people that he taught my brother. And my brother's like, you suck. You're no good at that. You're so much better than me, or I'm so much better than you. And anytime I showed any kind of piano talent, even to my mom or my grandfather, the response was, oh, you ain't seen nothing. Let me play you something. Get out of the way. So I learned at a young age to just step out of the spotlight and just go hide in my room. So at a young age, I was showing the potential of being good at music, being funny, liking theater. I liked cooking. I was showing signs of having engineering, flaming, engineering aptitude, things like that. And between my father's need for attention and my brothers and my grandfather's, when they started up, my reaction was, well, nobody cares. I guess I'm just not good enough. And I was just happier in my room by myself. So I retreated. When I got to school, however, I exploded. I was the funniest kid. I was just, and I'd go home and I would just suppress it. My brother got worse and worse to the point when he started butting heads with my father. They were just at each other's throats, competing, which I thought was really unhealthy on my dad's part, because
what were they competing for?
Just petty, minor, sports stuff. Who could be the best? And it's one of those things where if the kid's doing it, and if a father kind of engages in it in a healthy way as a mature adult, it's fine. But my father was acting like a teenager. Mm-hmm. And I think it's because he didn't have a father growing up.
Right.
So he was using my brother as a surrogate father. And my brother was trying to just be a kid with his dad. And that got really bad. And the worse it got with them, the worse my brother got on me. And this, so we start getting to the point when my dad met my stepmother, and he actually fell in love with her. And then he split with my mom. And that was kind of nasty.
And Steve and Eve.
How old were you when that happened?
I was in the 5th grade, so I guess 11.
So Steve and Eve are your real parents.
So Steve met
Eve.
No, Steve met somebody else. Steve left
Eve for somebody else, which is your stepmom.
Yeah, she was a gourmet.
Which is your stepmom.
Yeah.
Okay. But Eve is your real mom.
Yeah.
Okay.
So where it gets really strange is the divorce was not pleasant because my mother basically fell apart because her whole life was she'd never really been on her own. And my father made it difficult by not just having a clean break. And he was kind of tormented. My brother went batshit. He had my father left when my brother had just entered high school, which is like
15, 16.
The worst age if you're just starting to butt heads with your dad. And so there was about a year or so where I was basically alone. My mom came home from work and cried herself to sleep. My brother was off stoned, drunk in high school. My father was gone. He'd moved out. I ran the house. I took care of myself. I biked to school. I biked to the store to buy groceries. My mom would hand me money. I couldn't get her to get out of her room. And I just ran the house at 12 years old.
Wow.
Did she end up with lupus?
That's lupus is a...
Lupus. She had a bald spot.
Lupus is
and
entirely different.
Well, I didn't know if
It's an autoimmune disease.
Yeah. It's
I know what
common.
lupus is. I heard Lucas. I was like, oh, who's Lucas?
No, but
Yeah.
lupus is a very serious disease.
Yeah.
Right. And it can be caused by stress.
Yeah.
Right.
She's, and she will always have an autoimmune problem. But
Right.
at that point, it was exacerbated. And she was
Of course.
couldn't really function. I even found out later that she would go to work when she worked at this bank and her employees would let her go and sleep in the break room for hours. She She just slept all the time.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
because they're exhausted. Like I've known people with lupus, so like
Yeah.
that's a severe disease and very debilitating in so many ways.
So then they finally realized that the divorce was inevitable. And there was a year where my father that was done. And ironically, my relationship with my father began when they officially realized they were not going to be married.
Did your brother's relationship end?
It ended.
Okay.
My relationship, I started seeing my father regularly. We did things together. We saw movies together. We had all this. So it began for me. Like I really didn't have, we did stuff, but it wasn't the same. I never really felt like, it was always like he was busy or something like that.
He
And
was
now-
that guy that lived there.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then that was normal because just whatever, dad is doing dad stuff. And then what's really strange is that he actually got with my stepmother and he kind of became a committed guy. And then we had regular time together.
He was more of a father in his second marriage.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And my stepmother was pleasant and I liked her.
Was she hot?
Glenn,
She's attractive.
somehow,
Yeah,
where is this
I-
podcast
Let's
going?
gotta go there.
Yeah, where is this podcast
You know what?
going?
Sometimes the podcast just needs to take a quick
So you had this completely different relationship with your dad once that he hooked up with his second wife, right? So how has this affected all of your relationships going forward? Like obviously this played a major part in your life
Mhm.
and how you participated in relationships. And in talking to you earlier, like for instance, when, as we progress in this story and we talked to you and Misty about where you went in your relationship, you ended up dating women who are unavailable to you or,
Mhm.
right? So tell us about that. Like how has this affected? Yeah, I don't know. How did this affect all of your
I would say
relationships?
relates more to my brother in that convincing me that I was a worthless piece of crap. And
You're not.
I know
You're
this
not.
now.
No, you're
No, because when I finally got to high school, my life had stabled out. My mom had remarried. My stepfather was not, he's not great, but he was
He was
stable.
a Texan.
Yeah, it was just there was a lot of stability.
Oh, yeah.
Mom remarried, it was stable. Dad remarried, it was stable. My brother was just gone by then. He got kind of thrown out of the house, and he was just into everything, drugs and alcohol. And the last year I lived with him, he put a cigarette out on me, right there. See it?
Just like in the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he progressively became more and more of a monster to me. And, he'd turn friends against me and he would do all this crap that was the classic narcissist stuff. We found out in the last 5 or 6 years that he's diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. So, which is right between, I think, narcissistic personality disorder and sociopath. And he's a whole nother, I'll touch on that a little bit later, but basically when I got to high school, I was extremely insecure and kind of knew I was funny, kind of knew I had some musical ability, but I just didn't know what to do with it. And so my whole approach for years to relationships was nobody likes me. Nobody likes me. It took me years to get over that. So every real long-term relationship I had started with the woman basically making the first move. My first long-term girlfriend lasted 4 years, and she basically initiated it.
Is that Rosie Palms?
Yeah,
No.
and her 5 sisters.
No. So it did have a profound
Yeah.
effect on you.
But also she was the high school girlfriend. We got along. We, in a lot of ways, she and I had a better relationship than a lot of married people. But I ended up breaking up with her and moving to Texas. I got accepted in North Texas, but I didn't break up with her because I didn't like her. Like I was devastated to leave. There was something inside of me that I remember thinking, I don't know if I'm here because you're the one or because I'm too afraid that I'm never going to find anyone else.
How old were you when your parents divorced? And how old were you when you met Misty?
When my parents officially divorced, I would have been 13, and I met Misty when I was 20.
Oh, wow.
Met her for the first time.
Okay.
But
I thought there might have been a little bit closer
No.
gap. Okay.
But it was the relationship thing for me was it was years after high school that I found out that there were girls who were interested in me. Because like I started in high school doing theater and music and playing trumpet. I taught myself piano.
And only boys would have been interested.
No, Glenn.
No, and I did stand-up comedy at age 14. I did it every year. So there was a part of me that desperately needed to prove to myself that I was good at something.
Right, that you needed the validation.
Yeah, you were searching for that attention. You were searching for validation.
And
Absolutely.
I desperately needed other people to validate me.
Right.
Because I had been just told, not only had I been told by my brother that you're a piece of shit, but I had this family, this extended family of extroverts and narcissists who were just really eager to just shove you out of the way and take the spotlight.
Right.
And me being an introvert, my reaction was, well, whatever. And I would just leave the room and go be by myself. So it took a long time for me to kind of figure out. That's how I got into comedy.
I actually thought that it was going to be much longer between you with your family and then Misty. But if you were 13, 14 to 20, that's only about 6 years.
Well, I mean,
that's not that long.
But what do you
13 to 20? Yeah,
when you're
that's
asking
only
about
6 years.
when you're
I'm
asking,
sorry. It's not that long.
but when you're asking about Misty and I, do you mean like how long it was when we first met, or first?
Well, when you first met, you were 20, but then it took you a while to get to
yeah,
that.
it was like 12 years.
First time I ever gave her an extra long hug was.
When was the first time you casually fondled her?
Yep.
Well, I would say
we were like
2002.
Yeah, it was 2002.
So 15 years. My parents divorced in 97. And what is that?
87.
I'm trying to figure out what's the connection there.
Your
I'm
parents,
just thinking
your parents divorced in 87.
87.
Like it just took a long time for you to develop a real significant, meaningful relationship, like where you recognize that.
Yeah, and from my standpoint, I'm thinking your personality didn't even begin to develop until your parents divorced.
No.
And then you started developing
high
this whole
school.
personality.
My personality really came out in high school when I surrounded myself by really good friends.
Right.
And I was just talking to her, Misty, about this the other day, is that I look at my parents and I look at my dad and grandfather, my brother. I could have very easily become, for lack of a better word, Voldemort. I could have been a complete piece of shit.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Because I through high school I displayed moments of arrogance, and when having come off of a comedy set,
you were seeking validation to provide a positive influence as opposed to I'm air quoting here, a Voldemort that would have
like a vampire thing.
Yeah, but more of a controlling. Voldemort was great, but evil.
Yeah, and I do think that a part of that is that, to use the Harry Potter metaphor, is that I chose really well who I kept company with, because I felt really good around people. What I gravitate towards.
Is Misty your Hermione?
Yeah.
Or your
Aww.
Or your Ron.
She's my Ron because she's so white.
I'm not a ginger, though. I'm not a ginger.
No.
That's all right.
Although I do have family ginger.
Harry and Ron forever.
Right.
But like my brother chose the most horrific people you can imagine in the neighborhood. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I was around people who were very much nerdy and introverted, who could sit. One of my best friends to this day is Josh, who I've known since we were 14. And there's
Josh, don't
probably
just through social media.
Yeah. But he's one of those people that there's a deep intellectual side, deep intelligence, and a vulnerability. Like he won't hesitate to share something incredibly vulnerable, which takes courage and that to me is far more courageous and more indicative of somebody who has strength than some blowhard jack off.
Right. So through all of this that you've gone with your grandparents and your parents and in this development, and then the relationship with Misty, how in your relationship have you applied all of this information and what you've learned?
First of all, I refused to get into a long-term relationship until I got to a point in my life where I felt like I could be on my own, that I wasn't afraid to be alone. that was a big deal.
When did you feel like you had something worthwhile to offer?
Right.
That's a good question. I don't know if I've really thought about that. It was, I think that in the years after when I met you two and I did improv is when I started realizing that
You're welcome, Misty.
And I was saying earlier, because I went through that period in my late 20s where I had a job and then I lost a couple of jobs and I was very depressed and lonely and all that.
You had us as a foundation.
And I went and did improv.
More scary foundation.
But that 2005 was a really big deal year for me because my job was back, kind of career was back. I was dating, but I didn't feel like I had to.
Was that pre or post real estate?
Middle, because I got my real estate license in 2004.
Okay.
I made good money off that, but
Yeah,
it was
you
just
did.
a side thing. Yeah. But like, I mean, even like there was a time when I was like Leanne's like, and we went out. I took Leanne to remember Commander's Palace.
Yeah, it was a very nice dinner.
So Tommy was humping on you.
But that was a point in my life where
What?
That's when Tommy was humping on you.
Yeah.
Oh, in the
I don't know that
I had-
story.
that was
so.
I had one like at my work. We had done some kind of a office pool, and I won like $300. And
And
I
Leanne.
said to Leanne, "Come on, we're going to Commander's Palace."
It was very nice.
And
What is
Yeah.
Commander's Palace? Is that something that's been
It's from
torn down?
Louisiana.
It's a
it
New
doesn't
Orleans-
exist anymore here, but it's still
It's
in
a New Orleans
Oh, okay.
Where was
restaurant.
it? It was in a casino.
It was in the
like-
Aladdin, yeah.
Yeah.
Which doesn't exist.
But that was one of
Yeah,
those
yeah,
times
okay.
when it was in 10 years earlier, I'd have been like a pushover and trying like without any care as to who you really were.
Right.
I would be just like me.
Right.
And we go out to this dinner and we just had a great time.
Yeah.
And I left going, I don't have an agenda here. We're going to go and do improv and I don't feel like I have to ask her out again. I mean, I
Right.
always liked you and there's always a little attraction there, but it wasn't like, whatever. It was no big deal. We just had a good time. And that's kind of a changing point in the mind of like, you know
We
what?
could go out and
Yes.
be like it was a totally different thing. Like
There
we could
wasn't
go
the
out.
pressure.
I didn't
we could
have an agenda.
friends,
Yeah.
Yeah.
We could have a nice time, but it didn't have to be a thing.
Exactly.
Like it didn't have to be like we had to like
And it-
we could be friends. We were
Yeah.
okay with it.
But it was also, in that I didn't have to use that date as somebody validating me as, am I good enough? Am I attractive? It didn't matter.
Sure.
We just had a really good time. And that was enough. That was a really big deal.
Yeah.
And the weird thing with the learning about my brother and all that stuff, my mom spent the last 15 years dealing with her own childhood and her own marriage. Like she would not forgive my father. And she's just now gotten to the point, she's going to be 70 next year or in a couple of years. But she's just now figured out that she's been carrying around this anger and this guilt about her father leaving her as a child because she now realizes he was out banging broads, cheating on his mom, and the fact that my dad wasn't this fairy tale thing, that he was.
She's kind of facing all of her
Yeah.
own reality.
And I had to remind her, you two didn't belong together, which she didn't want to hear. But I'm like, when you guys split up, my life improved,
Right.
which is something people don't think about. Sometimes you're like, oh, we don't want a divorce because like Misty's mother and stepfather, like, I got to stay with your stepfather because of her brother. No, you don't, because sometimes it's better for the kid. It wasn't better for my brother, but he was already far gone.
Yeah, it would have been better for my brother
Right.
if my mom and stepdad had split long before, because my brother ended up with anger issues,
Serious anger issues. Yeah.
and now he's a really good kid, but he's spoiled rotten, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that my mom just would put up with my stepdad's shit just because she didn't want Sean to be messed up. And my feeling was like, look at me and my sister. Are we messed up? No, we're doing just fine.
Yeah.
And my mom and dad split up when I was 11 and my sister was 5. So, why do you think that being in a horrible marriage is good for
Kid.
your
Yeah.
kid?
Yeah.
The end of this is that in the last few years, I'll do two little parts of this. My brother, his marriage ended. And my brother had jumped from our house growing up and moved in with my aunt. My aunt's kind of a deadbeat, and my aunt kicked him out, and he moved.
Steve's sister.
Eve's.
Okay.
And then
the audience wants to know.
And then he immediately moved in with his girlfriend, who then they got married really young. And my brother's ex-wife, because they're divorced now, I didn't like her. She's a piece of work. She's very ignorant and kind of an asshole. But this woman put up with so much shit from my brother. She was the one who basically earned the income and took care of the house. She had a job. My brother barely worked and just emotionally and financially sponged off of her. And then they had two kids, and he became a raging alcoholic, verbally abusive, you name it. I mean, domestic cops calling. He was one of those guys who, I was listening to one of your podcasts about the narcissist stuff, and there was a time when they were getting divorced when my brother had worked my sister-in-law into such a frenzy. She had been drinking, got her to the point of absolute insanity, and then called the police. And by the time the police showed up, my former sister-in-law was absolutely raging and screaming at everybody.
He was basically gaslighting her.
And she got arrested.
Oh.
And they let her out, but basically he was able to manipulate it so that he got full custody of the kids. He had no job. He had nothing going for him. And she left for her own sanity and just took off. And then he moved in with my mother. My brother did. With the kids. With the kids. This was like 2010.
Was Eve remarried?
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
My stepfather, remember my stepfather when I grew up? When those kids came back, my stepfather just left.
Okay.
I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And he just took off. So now my mom's been divorced again.
Wow.
And all of a sudden, I had just had like my nose fixed. I had my septum fixed. And a couple weeks go by.
You have a beautiful petite nose.
I do.
It's very nice.
It's like LaToya Jackson.
Totally offset.
Except I'm darker.
Face.
So anyway, I get a phone call from my brother who's living with my mom at this time. And he says, we're on our way. I'm taking mom to rehab. I'm sorry. What? My mom didn't drink. My mom was one of those people at a wedding would have half a glass of wine and fall asleep. You're doing what? She's a drunk and she's in this, that. I'm taking her to rehab. So we get in the car and we drive down, and my mom's neighbors are there. And they're like, your mother, you need to do something. Your brother's out of control and all this other stuff. And I'm just like, what the hell is going on? So I call because they're not there yet. And I call my brother and I go, where are you? And he says, we stopped at a bar.
Just trying to.
Wait, he's taking your mom to a rehab, but he stops at a bar.
Yeah, because he's an alcoholic.
So it's her last
He's
drink.
an alcoholic.
Oh my God.
No, but he's an alcoholic.
Right.
And she wasn't.
So
to this day, I don't believe that she was ever an alcoholic.
No.
She believed she was.
No, she binge drank. When my brother was there, she was binge drinking. I would have been shooting heroin into my eye every day if I would live with that fucking person. So before they get there, I go to my mom's neighbors and I go, you can't leave me alone with him. I'm ready to murder him. And so he shows up and he's just like, this shooting the shit, like nothing's going on. And I'm seething. And I could just feel the hatred and rage. This is a whole lifetime of hatred and rage boiling up. And I spent a good deal of my adult life just being like, well, everything that happened to us happened when we were kids and all that stuff.
Yeah, this happens as an adult.
I'm sitting in this office and they're checking her in and I don't know what to do because she's sloppy drunk. I've never seen her like this. And so I'm just like going with it. And I don't want to say their names. The neighbors are like, well, she has been drinking a lot. Maybe this will be good for her. At least get her out of the way and her insurance will cover it. And so whatever. So anyway, that all happens. And I go out of my way to convince my brother to leave and move to Sacramento, back to California. My mom, they let her go. The next day she sobers up and they're like, you shouldn't be here. What are you here for?
A couple of days. It was
So they realized she wasn't an alcoholic. No, that wasn't her thing.
She had issues and she benefited greatly from some therapy.
So your brother tried doing something weird with her.
Basically, he was gaslighting her.
Well, he was
Making her-
projecting
making
his own
projecting his
alcoholism onto
Right.
her.
Right.
Now, I just have a question, and this is just for my own clarity because I don't want to certainly question how you feel about your brother. Do you ever think about what he did to you?
Mm-hmm.
That he was a child doing that?
Oh yeah.
I mean, is there any remorse whatsoever in that he didn't understand?
Yeah. It was a couple things in that when he was having his divorce, he started not only doing that stuff to my parents and his ex-wife, but he was saying really horrible things to his own kids. And I was finding out about it. Like, I mean, he was
So
saying,
he had kids as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So he was
that's
doing to his
true.
kids
Yeah.
what he had done to you.
and
Yeah.
but worse in that there was a time when he got really drunk and hit his son in the face. And there was another time, and more recently, since he's left town 2 years ago, he got really drunk and hit his daughter in the face. And but while this is going down in Vegas, there was a point when
Wait, your brother lived here in
Yeah,
Vegas?
yeah.
He did.
Okay.
He was a pilot. Does that not terrify you? He got fired because he was calling in to his work. Like he would be sober when he
Did he
flew.
ever like smack his flight attendants
No.
in the face? Okay.
But he would when he was not
He
working.
was on a commercial airline.
Okay.
commercial airline. Oh,
Okay.
see, I'm
Okay.
thinking private
Right,
airlines.
nothing-
Because that's fine
No,
in private
When
airlines.
he
Yeah.
got-
he was doing private shit. not-
Yeah. Well, he was Scenic Airways and some others. But when he would be home and he would get really drunk and call into the office and chew people out, and they just fired him. Anyway, but he had done something, and he said something really vicious to his own son, and I basically confronted him, and I said, if you want to pick on somebody, you come pick on me, because I put up with your bullshit my whole life, and like you're not going to do this to a goddamn 13-year-old, your
Right.
own son. Yeah.
So how, God, okay. So you've dealt with so much going through with starting with your grandparents down to your parents' relationship, and then obviously it having its huge impact on your brother.
hmm
And then coming down to your relationship with you and Misty, like, where are you now with all of this?
Well, because the stuff with my brother occurred starting in 2010, he moved out of the state and he continued to kind of do the same kind of gaslighting, bully, bullshit tactics to my parents and the rest of
Yeah.
the family. And I had to disconnect from it. I couldn't participate because it triggered all this stuff in my childhood. And I realized what impact he had on my childhood. So it's only been in the last like 6 years that I've really been able to figure out. I've been able to figure out every trigger that I have regarding explosive anger. Anytime I've ever blown up at somebody with just incredible rage, or I can trace it to my brother. And I think any anger I have at my parents was them not either believing me when I was being gaslit by my brother,
Right.
or not defending me. And at the same time, I don't think my mother has done so much work in the last several years that she has completely renewed herself. Like she's a new person. She's done
But
amazing
she's
work.
really worked at
She's
it.
she's worked at it tirelessly, and it really took all this shit happening, and it took her son being a piece of shit, and it took her second husband leaving her for her to get to this point. And she's at a wonderful place. My father is just kind of as good as he's going to get, but he doesn't quite recognize the role he had in creating my brother. And I don't think any of these people really recognize the role that my grandfather had
Right.
in creating all of them. And that these traits that were passed down, it really has influenced my decision at a young age to not have kids. Like, I don't want to do this. But we're really, we're really,
didn't think about
it works really well with us. And so part of it with her and I is that if she and I are having a disagreement and I suddenly feel my blood boiling, I quickly can trace it back. I'm getting better at figuring it out and realizing it's not Misty at all.
Right.
That it's something else. And then I can communicate to her. I can articulate, you know what? That's not, you said something that set me off.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, and it really comes down to all these years. I've spent all these years kind of like wanting to do like theater and music and cooking and
Porn.
midget
Right, yeah,
porn,
so
deviant,
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
deviant midget.
midget
Yeah,
porn.
yeah. That's the only.
But all these things that I do that I've been good at, I can trace it
You're
back
good
to
at deviant midget porn.
who isn't
Yeah.
really. You know,
Hmm.
it takes about half the schooling.
Right.
So, what? But no, that's all. I can trace that back to me really needing validation. And I don't know if we want to wrap up now because everyone's getting tired, but it does lead to that one story of you and I performing at the NBA show because all the
I wish
years
there was a recording of that.
No, there needs not be any recording of the NBA show.
There
So
probably is.
we actually did we talk about this on audio?
No.
I don't know that we
I'll
discussed
just
this during
get
dinner,
rid-
but basically I booked a show for us and our improv troupe in Vegas performing at the halftime show for National Basketball Association.
Yeah.
So there was a huge game.
2005, middle of the summer,
Middle of summer, we performed at the halftime show and we got
and it was several thousand people.
right. And it was a
And-
big deal. It was like it was a paid gig.
Yeah. And and I had done comedy and I'd done improv and all these things as a kind of a need to prove myself and feel better. And I thought I was good
This
at it.
was not the George Wallace show.
No.
This was a separate show that we did. Yeah.
But that was the show at the NBA was a turning point because the three of us went out, the whole troupe wasn't available. And we kind of had to throw together what we were going to do because it was a strange setup.
Right, yeah.
And basically to get to the point of it, once we started doing our act, the entire place was heavily booing us. Like, I mean, angrily booing
Yes.
and
But
saying,
I don't remember that
Sure,
part.
they weren't booing the kid
I-
that walked out.
I really don't remember them booing.
and they were yelling, "You suck." And they started getting up in
You
droves.
sure they weren't yelling at Leanne?
It could have been.
You suck, Leanne.
No.
I think they would have probably stuck around for that, though, right? If that was
I don't know. Was it a boo or an ooh?
I think it was an ew.
no, they were
Or
they
an
were
ew.
they were
No.
they
but
were
okay.
seething with anger. It was you would have thought
I
that
don't
we
think
came out there.
so.
Oh, they
Who was
were
playing? Which
It was
two NBA teams?
who knows? Because you have to ask Jen because she was there too. It was you would have thought we had told them basketball was over. They were angry. I mean,
This
they
is
were
the
just.
last game
Ever.
in the history.
Basketball is done.
Yeah.
I've talked
Outlaw.
to other people who attended other NBA games, and they said that those crowds, those people were always awful, no
Yeah.
matter what it was. So anyway, when I was doing physical comedy, and I just pushed it to the limit. And when we were leaving, one of you had asked me, why did you like perform harder? So like when it was over, you were like, seem to do more. And I said, because fuck them. At that point, I realized I didn't give a shit anymore. Like, I hope I ruined their goddamn week. And that was a turning point for me because I thought, you know what? I really don't care what anyone thinks anymore.
Yeah.
I'm doing what I
Yeah.
love.
Yeah. Screw
You guys got
Yeah.
a free show. I didn't ruin your day. So kiss my ass. And that was a big turning point for me.
Wow. This all ended up coming out to the point where you ended up seeking out your validation and stuff through improv and performing and things like that, which is interesting because that kind of came and concluded where you guys were in the midst of your on and off again
Yeah.
relationship.
6 months after that, we were engaged.
Wow.
Chris is totally improvising the relationship. Still is.
Right.
Yeah, totally. We
Wow,
both are.
okay.
It's okay.
So this has been
I'm
this
learning
is
improv.
Well, yes.
this has been quite an evening of learning here with these two and your journey through divorce and many other relationships and how to get through it. So I thank you
We've all
guys.
gotten closer.
Yes,
Yeah.
I feel like very close to you guys right now. Oh, but I appreciate you guys sharing all of this with us, and I hope that our listeners appreciate it, and I'm sure that they can very much relate to it on many levels because it's
Mhm.
just you guys listening to the other episodes. How much you picked up that is like, oh, I know this story. This
Yeah.
is the same story we have. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
In fact, he would annoy the shit out of me because he would like start talking in the middle of the episode we were listening to, and I'm like, I'm trying to listen to what.
Right? Nice. Well, thanks, you guys. Thanks, Glenn, for coming back.
Oh,
For-
I got 7 episodes.
We've got more episodes
Right
coming
now.
up with Glenn. We
You're
got
like
more
this
stuff.
episode's Jackie the Joke Man.
Yeah.
Right? We got more episodes coming up with Chris.
I'd be happy to crash every episode with everyone and beat Jackie the Joker.
All right. Well, thanks, you guys.